Hello and welcome to this episode. My name is Audrey Shaw, the TrueSport Outreach Education Program Lead. At TrueSport, our mission is simple and bold: to change the culture of youth sport by providing powerful educational tools to equip young athletes with the resources to build life skills and core values for success on and off the field. Founded on the three cornerstones of sportsmanship, character building and life skills, and clean and healthy performance, TrueSport aims to partner with extraordinary organizations like the Taylor Hooton Foundation to promote a more positive youth sport experience. We hope you'll enjoy this collaborative mini-series between TrueSport and the Taylor Hooton Foundation on the All Me podcast. And we hope you'll use the information presented by subject experts and world-class athletes to go out and make a difference in the lives of your young athletes.
Hello, this is Joe Trahan, welcoming you to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooton Foundation, whose mission is to enlighten the world to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances. As the national leader on this subject, they communicate their educational messages through various methods, including this podcast. Thank you for listening and enjoy the show.
Hey everyone, Brian Parker here, the Director of Education for the Taylor Hooton Foundation. I will be your host for today's episode, and today we are diving into the world of teamwork. Teamwork is a concept that is crucial to the success of any kind of group setting, not just athletics, but it's one that can sometimes be hard to achieve. What does successful teamwork look like? When do we know that it's actually taking place? What are the core concepts that compose comprehensive teamwork? So in this episode, we'll be talking to an expert in this area, Dr. Nadia Kyba. Nadia is a registered social worker and a widely respected expert in the field of conflict resolution. She's got more than 20 years of experience within the child welfare system and more recently in the private and not-for-profit sectors. She is the founder and the president of Now What Facilitation, which is a group that provides teams with the skills to manage conflict, increase productivity, retention, and overall success. Lately, she's also the author of a book. It's called This Is How We Roll, a coach's guide to transforming conflict into high performance. And lastly, she is also a TrueSport expert and part of our TrueSport Collaborative podcast series. She's got a passion for training and conflict management, and it has led her to design workshops for sports associations, businesses, families, all of which address individual and group conflict. So this episode will dive into her expertise in things like leadership, conflict resolution, and communication so that you can improve the teamwork with the groups that are in your life. So without further ado, let's bring Nadia into the show. Nadia, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, Brian?
I am doing great. I'm excited for our talk today because I think it's something that's going to be really valuable for our listeners, but valuable to me as well. I know we're going to talk about the idea of teamwork, and I really think that's something that applies to a lot of different situations and really to anybody that tunes into this. So I think it's going to be great. I appreciate you spending some time with us, and I've given our listeners a little bit of background about you, and just to kind of give them a little bit of background on what our discussion's going to be. Obviously, I've already mentioned that we'll be discussing about teamwork, but I also know that's a very broad word. It can cover a lot of different areas within that framework. So we're going to boil it down to a few different subjects within that teamwork framework, and things like leadership and conflict resolution and communication. All of these things I think are super important aspects to teamwork and areas that I know that you specialize in. So I think we're going to learn a lot by the end of this discussion. I'm looking forward to it. Are you ready to do this?
I'm ready, Brian. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. I can already tell that we're going to make a good team. We're going to teach teamwork even through our conversation. So this will be exciting. Thank you for hanging out. I always start my conversations with a little bit of background on the guest. And I know I've told our listeners that you're a registered social worker. You're the founder of Now What, which is a group we'll talk about here in just a second. You're also a TrueSport expert, which is part of the series that we're collaborating on with TrueSport, which makes a lot of sense because we have a lot of overlap between the mission of what we do and what TrueSport does. So there's a lot of overlap between the work that you do and what we do, and with TrueSport, it all kind of collaborates together. So we're going to dive into all that. Before we do that, though, Tell our listeners a little bit about your background and your career path leading up to what you do now at Now What, and leading up to what you do with TrueSport as well. Were there any specific interests you had growing up that kind of pushed you towards the field that you're in now? Tell us a little bit more about the background of Nadia.
Oh, well, thanks for asking, Brian. I think it's really cool that you led with that question, because one of the premises of team building and of conflict management is getting to know the people who are on your team. And so I appreciate you asking, just like, where did all this come from? What's your story? So my story is that I grew up playing all the sports. Like, I just loved, basketball, volleyball, track, all those sports. And I grew up living in both Canada, in Ontario, and went to high school actually in Southern Africa during apartheid. So when apartheid was going on, I went to an international school that had a really large ethnic and cultural diversity in its student population and teachers. And so that I think is sort of the background in how I became a social worker and my sense of social responsibility. And it helped to develop one of my core values of equity. So then moving, sort of fast forwarding to university, I ended up studying political science and then social work eventually. And then I moved into a career working in the child welfare system in British Columbia, which is in the western part of Canada. I worked there for about 21 years. And as you can imagine, in child welfare, there is a ton of conflict that happens, navigating plans for supporting child safety within their families, within their communities, looking at the foster care system. And I really enjoyed that. And it gave me that opportunity to understand conflict and understand how conflict can be leveraged to support team growth and team building. And at the same time that I was doing that, I got married and I had two amazing daughters who I also put into sports, of course, because I strongly believed in all of the life lessons that sports gives kids and gives adults in terms of volunteer opportunities. My husband started coaching them when they were very little, like they were 4, I guess, when they started soccer and swimming. And then as a social worker looking in on that, I saw incredibly high levels of unmanaged conflict going on just within organized sport. I saw it as a big distraction to the teams that my kids were on and the teams that my husband was coaching. And I saw a lot of coaches and board volunteers who were unprepared for that and really unsupported in managing the conflict that was happening. And then what I saw as they got older was that I saw a lot of kids dropping out of sports, and I saw a lot of coaches, a lot of volunteer coaches quit, board members quit, and I thought I could help. So I ended up leaving my job in government and starting Now What as a business and supporting sports associations, but also business associations in training conflict management as a team building mechanism. I then wrote a book for coaches, which is called This Is How We Roll, and it's a coach's guide to turning conflict into high performance. And I've been really thrilled to be working with TrueSport in the States over the last year or so, just over a year. So that's been my journey, and I'm just loving it. I love the work that I do, and I feel that I'm definitely supporting some incredible organizations to just be their best selves.
Yeah, that's an amazing journey. I'm listening to what I love about your story is you had so many different things along the way and experiences that almost shaped and molded you into doing exactly what you do now, right? So you grow up loving sports, you still, live in that world a bit. You move to South Africa, you see the inequities there that drives your passion into social work, and just a bunch of different things that kind of happen in your life that come together. And now you get to, draw on that and do what you do now at Now What, which I think is just a really fascinating thing on how life sometimes just guides us into certain things and certain places. And that's led you to Now What. And that's really what I want to talk about next. I know you've already mentioned you're the founder of Now What and what you do, and that you all have a focus on conflict resolution, which I know is a super complex topic. There's a lot that goes into that, and I'm sure there's a lot that you do there at Now What. But if I'm going to ask you, I guess, to try to sum up what Now What does. I mean, what's the goal and mission of the organization there, and what tools do you use to achieve those goals at the end of the day?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, like one of the things that I did notice with a lot of the teams that I was involved with personally as a parent, and then with my husband as a coach, was that teams were sort of blindsided by conflict. So they'd be, I don't know if you've ever been on a team like this, Brian, but teams will be sort of trucking along, and they have a goal, and they have, maybe it's just a rec, or maybe they have, they want to win a championship, whatever it is. And then something comes up, like there's some sort of conflict or problem that happens, and then the team gets completely sidetracked by that, and all of their energy and attention goes into trying to figure out how to manage that. And what our organization does is provide teams and associations with the skills and tools to anticipate conflict, so they know it's coming, recognize it when it's there, because sometimes people don't even know conflict when it's in front of them, right? There's some subtleties to it, and then have the skills to address it and prevent it from coming back. So what we do is we work with teams, and we work with coaches and leadership by doing workshops and individual coaching to help them to normalize conflict and use some of those skills and strategies to manage it when it comes up. I also have a workbook for sports teams as well as workplaces that I use when I'm doing my workshops, that they have that written material that they can refer back to. Because generally what I like to say is that conflict management isn't like a one-off thing where you have one training session or meeting and all of a sudden everybody's, brilliant at it. It's kind of complicated, messy work. So having this workbook supports that ongoing work and gives everyone the same language and literally puts everyone on the same page as they move through their season.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that you said there that fascinate me. Well, number one, when you said, have I ever been on a team with conflict? Absolutely. I hope my high school basketball coach is listening to this, because him and I didn't necessarily see eye to eye all the time, but that's probably a different story. But I think that it's kind of like you said, I think we've all been there, right? And I know that we're talking a lot about conflict in the world of athletics, and that's going to apply to a lot of things we're talking about. But teamwork applies in a lot of different settings, and conflict applies in a lot of different settings. And what you just said, one of the things I pulled out from there is normalized conflict, because I think even in my mind, even before I started talking with you about all of this, conflict has this really negative connotation, and hey, we can't really talk about that, or let's try to avoid that. And reality is it's just going to happen, right? Whatever team that we're working with, we're probably going to face that, right? So we've got to understand that exists. Okay, let's work together to manage it and navigate that. And I think that's what you all do there at Now What, and what you do really well, and the programs kind of help people guide through that, right? And that's what leads us all into successful teamwork. If we can navigate that conflict, that's how we work better as a team. And so I think that flows right into our next area of discussion, and that is teamwork, right? We're going to dive into some specific concepts within that word, but I want to really focus on that word first, because I think we've all heard that word teamwork. We have an idea on what successful teamwork is, but give me your opinion on that. Through your eyes, what do you view successful teamwork as? Is it the accomplishment of a goal together? Is that what we're looking for? Is it just the pathway of progression? Is that really the key to teamwork? How do we know when successful teamwork is taking place at the end of the day?
Well, as a social worker, social workers really like to talk about process. So unlike, I think, other areas that focus more on outcomes, social workers are really into the whole process piece and ensuring that process happens so that you can have positive outcomes. So when I'm thinking about process and I'm thinking about teamwork and team goals, a big part of considering the process is getting buy-in from all of the team members on the team goal. So rather than, sometimes I'll see coaches and they'll be like, yep, this is our goal for the season. They'll like laminate the goal, they'll stick it up in the locker room, and then everybody's, kind of expected to jump in and be on the team and share that same goal. Whereas what I believe is that when we think about process, we consider that everybody is on a team for a different reason. And in order for everybody to buy into that same team goal, there has to be an acknowledgement of why each person is on the team in the first place. So it could be that there are team members who are there because they want to be a part of a community. They want to have a sense of belonging and something that's bigger than themselves. You might have team members who are there because they're looking to, and I don't know if this was you playing high school basketball, but maybe they want to play post-secondary basketball, or maybe they want to eventually have a professional career in the sport. So everybody's sort of there for a different reason. So to have successful teamwork, first there needs to be that acknowledgement of, well, why are you guys all here? Let's get to know each other and figure out why are we all here and what's our common goal here? So we're all here for different reasons, but there should be some commonality. And I think I'm a big basketball person as well. So sometimes I refer to basketball, but I don't know if you know, I'm a big Toronto Raptors fan, and I recently read their coach's Nick Nurse's book, and he was talking a lot about this sort of concept that even at that level, even in the NBA with these professional basketball players, he has to pay close attention to the reasons why each individual is on that team and what each game means to each individual. Are they looking to set some sort of a record, or, and so he's considering that, because the more you can tap into that, the more you can get alignment on a team goal, and you can foster a situation where teamwork can take place to support each other's goals. So that's sort of how I view teamwork. I think that when teams are able to show respect for each other and give space for individuals to reach their goal, then they build that trust that's really important to achieve the team goal. And I think that successful teamwork takes place when individuals feel like they can really be themselves, like their true self, and they have the confidence at that point then to take risks and perform at their best. So for athletes to be able to take risks, they have to be able to feel like they're not being judged by their teammates. So if there's diversity on a team, if there are people maybe who have different sexual orientations or gender identities, maybe different cultures, come from different racial backgrounds, whatever it might be, maybe they're extroverts or introverts, there's all different people that make up a team. If they feel that they're accepted, they can be themselves, that their goals are respected, then teamwork can happen. But I think there's a lot of stuff that kind of happens behind the scenes to foster that teamwork.
Yeah, I think it's a really complex process. Well, first of all, if you want to talk in just basketball metaphors and examples for the rest of the time, we can certainly do that. I'll be right there on the same page with you, number one. But number two, I do think it goes back to what you said at the very beginning, right, where we asked about your background and learning about you a little bit more. That's a really important process in all of this, right? Because I've probably made this mistake before as well, right? I'll watch sports and I just kind of assume, all right, well, for a team to be successful, the goal is, okay, we're going to win a state championship, whatever it might be, right? And if we achieve that goal, then we achieve successful teamwork. And I don't know that it's as simple as that, right? Because kind of like you just said, well, maybe that wasn't everybody's goal on the team. Maybe that wasn't the exact thing that they were looking to get out of this, right? So it goes back to that process of learning the people involved with the team first and foremost. And then, how do we work together for all of these different goals, not necessarily just this one that might be put on the pedestal at the end of the day. And I think a lot of that goes into who's leading that team and the leadership that's involved with that team as well, which is one of the concepts that I wanted to pull out of that teamwork construct and focus on. So we can move right into that one next. Leadership is one of those terms that, again, I think is probably more complex than sometimes we think about. And there's a lot of different leadership styles that are out there. So I don't think there's one, cookie cutter way to be a leader. But from your perspective, what does effective leadership look like? What have you seen examples of leaders that are doing it the right way? What recognizable skills do you think leaders tend to have at the end of the day?
I love this question because I agree. I don't think there's a cookie cutter approach to leadership. I think that there's a lot of different ways to lead teams, but some of the things that I think are key and fundamental to leadership, I would say the number one thing, and I kind of talked about this right at the beginning when you asked that great question about my, how did I get here? What's my story? Is leaders invest in relationship building. So they schedule time to get to know each other. and I think also this is the key to all conflict management. I think that people can work through problems when they come up if they know each other and they know like that maybe they have a cat and that cat's really a really important part of their life, and they've taken that time to get to know the name of the cat, or about their families, or about what drives them, like that question that you led with. And I think good leaders take the time away from the basketball court or whatever field you're playing on to foster that relationship building. I think great leaders embrace diverse ideas and diverse opinions so that they can leverage that diversity to create ideas that possibly they hadn't thought about before. So building on different ideas creates even better ideas. I think also great leaders anticipate and accept conflict, like we talked about earlier. They normalize it, and when it comes up, they look at it as an opportunity for growth. They also address it really quickly. They don't sort of avoid it and let it fester, because then it's tough to backtrack. I think great leaders listen well. I think they ask a lot of questions. One of the superstars of all social workers for us is Brene Brown. Like, she's like our Drake of social work, and she talks a lot about leaders being vulnerable, and I would agree with her. I think that great leaders are able to say what they don't know and own that, and sort of like lean into their own vulnerability, and lean into the people who they surround themselves with. And to do that, they need to be collaborative. They need to include their teams in decision making, being transparent. I think that those are all keys to great leadership. Just quickly back to your basketball, like talking about basketball and your coach, hopefully who's not listening. I think leaders are really transparent in why they make decisions on their teams. So if they're considering a starting lineup ahead of time, they're talking to the team about how they make those decisions. They allow space for the team to talk about the decision making, and then they follow through with what they say they're going to do. So if they say that this is something that might change a decision, then they are able to say, oh yeah, I've changed my mind and I'm going to support this new direction because this is what I've seen.
First off, before I respond to your answer, I was not expecting a Drake reference to come up during this episode, but I love it. I mean, I've been a hip hop fan for a long time. So hip hop, NBA, basketball, we are going down the right path in my mind. That's awesome. Number one. Number two,
well, Brian,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm Canadian, right? Like
right.
We have to reference, it's sort of part of what we have to do anytime we're publicly speaking. Reference Drake.
That's fair. Any other Canadian stars you want to just drop names on while we're talking, feel free. I'll allow it. That's fine with me. But as you were talking, I'm sitting there thinking back in my own life, right? Like, what are the leaders that I've had in my mind that stick out? And they do have a lot of those qualities that you talked about, right? Whereas, yeah, I know I'm like talking about like my high school basketball days. I struggled with that because I had a coach that didn't do a lot of those things. I played on a varsity basketball team. I didn't play on a JV team. And so that was kind of held against me. There was conflict from the very get-go, and we never discussed it. We never approached it. And on top of that, there was never any getting to know each other off the court, right? And that's really the thing that you said that stuck out to me, that I think when I look back, man, those really are the people that I remember. It's the ones that get to know you, even beyond just whatever team goal or setting that you're in. When you look back, right, and I'm just an example, you think of like, okay, tell us your favorite teachers that you ever had. You're probably going to think about, maybe it was your third grade teacher that really got to know you outside of school and the things that you like, not necessarily because in third grade you got straight A's or you achieved some goal. It's because of that leader and them getting to know you and developing that relationship. That's what really stuck out to me, and I think is a really crucial point to consider and think about. I think that makes total sense, but often not think about, because sometimes we just think, well, the leaders are the ones that win. I don't know that that's always the case. Oftentimes it leads to that, but there's more involved. And so I think it's a really interesting discussion to have. And I want to even take that leadership idea just a little bit further, because I know we've said that there's not a cookie cutter approach, and I agree with that. But I have also done some digging online and kind of read through your blog and stalked you a little bit online and learned more about the work that you do. And I came across a leadership article that I thought was really cool and some effective leadership methods that you talked about. And I want you to kind of break that down. There was a article in your blog where you talked about a few types of leadership, right? There was strength-based, there was trauma-informed, and there was culturally safe. Now, we could probably do an entire episode just focusing on those exact concepts, but is there a way you can kind of give us some insight into what each of those are and why they can be effective ways to be a leader?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So these are also social work concepts that we use to form relationships with people, to understand where people are at. And it sort of touches on some of my comments earlier about paying attention to the diversity on any team. So as a leader, that's crucial, because the people on the team need to be able to feel that they're able to be themselves and accepted for who they are in order to build trust with their teammates. If you don't trust your teammates, you're not really going to get anywhere, both in terms of your experience and in terms of your accomplishments. So starting with being trauma informed, that's basically having a recognition that everyone has a unique background. And sometimes, for many people, there is trauma in their background. Certainly in the child welfare system, we see that, but I think that we see that on any team. We don't know who's in the room with us and who's on our team and what their personal experiences have been. And sometimes trauma, a history of trauma, can come out in behaviors that are hard to understand and sometimes hard to link back to trauma. So, for example, I often will have associations, even workplaces, contact me about managing bullying type behaviors. So it could be that somebody's being excluded. There's gossip going on about that person. They're just exhibiting some really poor team behaviors. And what I always like to go to is, rather than just labeling that person a bully and sort of writing them off as the problem, really trying to understand the possible trauma that's driven that type of behavior. So it could be that that behavior is a coping mechanism for them. And really what they're looking for is belonging. And the way they're going about that is excluding another person or gossiping about them or just sort of creating havoc. And so once you can kind of take that trauma-informed approach as a leader, it's easier for you to address what's happening. So good leaders, I believe, ask themselves, like, what's behind the behavior? What's driving this person to treat other people on the team in that way? And then when we're thinking about creating a culturally safe team or supporting cultural safety on a team, doing that recognizes and really values cultural diversity on a team. And it's not just kind of saying, well, you can have the day off because you have a religious holiday coming up or something like that, but really trying to understand what are the different cultures of the people who make up the team, and not just in maybe their faith or their what country they're from, but even their culture in terms of how they see themselves. Like if they identify as being gay, or if they identify as being whatever their culture might be. Maybe they identify as being Christian, or it could be a faith, it could be a culture, they could be Filipino, it could, whatever that might be, and then embracing it. So, providing those opportunities that you were just talking about to get to know everyone on your team and what is their culture, how do they view themselves, and tell us more about that. Let us learn about what's important to you culturally. And we're not going to judge you for that. We're going to embrace it and accept it and appreciate it. And in doing that, a person can truly be who they are on that team. And I think that particularly recently, there's been a lot of tragedies that have been happening, certainly here in Canada and I know in the States as well. I think giving that time and space on a team to recognize that there needs, reconciliation is something that's happening within, for Indigenous communities. There's been some hate crimes that have been happening here in Canada, and recognizing how is that impacting the athletes on the team who are part of those communities, and giving them that space to talk about that and feel supported by the team, and recognizing that, they may be having a tough time, and it's time for the team to recognize that and offer support, show empathy, and feel that, give them that time to feel that they're valued, that they're a valued member of the team for who they are. The last type of leadership that I think is really important is strength-based leadership. And what strength-based leadership does is, in consideration of cultural safety and being trauma-informed, it looks at the resources and skills that each individual brings to the team, and it really taps into those resources when the individuals or the team are facing challenges. So rather than looking at like a deficit-based approach where you're reprimanding athletes for being late or for doing things like that, you're taking a strength-based approach, recognizing that maybe they're having a tough time, and talking about, well, how are they doing what they're doing, even if they are having a tough time? So good questions that coaches might ask by using a strength-based approach would be something like, hey, you showed up to practice today, even though you had a rough game last week. How'd you do that? Like, how did you get out of bed and come here today? Because last week you had to leave the court because you were having such a tough time. Or, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling about being on the team right now? And what would move you up 1 point? So using those types of questions to have, athletes who are having problems or a tough time really recognize their own resilience and tapping into some of those hidden strengths.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is really trying to understand the why behind the what, right? So instead of just focusing on the behavior, let's dive deeper than that and see what's really going on. And I don't think that, the 3 different types you just touched on are going to work for every single person on your team. But, if the more you get to know them, the more you can realize that, okay, this might work for this situation. This applies better to this situation. And then what you end up creating is a team that supports each other. And I think that's what you want, right? You want a team that, has each other's back and wants to do it for the person next to them. I again, as you're talking, I like to think back on my own life and stuff. I think back on like just simple things like group projects I had in class, right? The worst ones where it was always like, okay, I'm just going to do it because I know I'll get it done. Instead of like, oh, hey, how about I get to know each of my teams, figure out what their strengths are. Let's apply that to them. And then we want to help each other and we all want to do well together rather than just, hey, I'm worried about myself and what's going to be happening to me. So I think, those are all really fascinating ideas and concepts to learn more about. And I'll put a link to not only this specific article on your blog, but your blog in general. So the listeners can read through that and get a further understanding of this and really ask themselves these kind of questions when they're in leadership situations. Okay, what can I take from this? What can I apply to create that supporting environment so we all move forward and have the end goal and want to work together? I think this is all really fascinating and helpful information when it comes to the world of leadership. And I think is a really good way for us to kind of wrap up that first concept and construct under teamwork while looking at that leadership coin. And I want to take that and drive it into the second concept that I kind of touched on in the beginning and start talking about conflict management. That's going to be tied in already to a lot of things that we talked about. But I know it's another area of expertise with you and another concept of teamwork that I really want to focus on, because in any setting, conflict can prevent a team from moving forward. It can really be what stops someone from achieving the goal at the end of the day. So I know your process at Now What for conflict management is going to be one that's very in depth. I know you have, shops and get-togethers that take weeks at a time to really dive through this. But if you really look at it from a high level, what's your driving strategy when it comes to navigating conflict as a whole so that teams can grow and move forward together?
So when we work with teams, we try to drive home the whole concept of conflict is normal. And when teams normalize it and put systems in place to manage it when it comes up, then they're more successful. So they don't back away from it or avoid it, and it doesn't fester in that way. And one of the theories that I really like was actually done in the 60s by a psychologist whose name is Bruce Tuckman, and he talked about the 4 stages of team building. You may have heard of Bruce Tuckman in this theory, but he talks about every team going through a forming stage where they first come together and they're a little bit shy around each other. They don't take risks, and then they move to the storming stage, which is where conflicts really start to pop up as people become more comfortable with each other. And then successful teams are able to work through those conflicts, and they move into what he calls the norming stage, and then the performing stage, which is when they reach sort of that high level of performance. And so what I like to do with teams is explain to them that they will go through these 4 stages, and the more that they can anticipate it and recognize it, the more successful they will be. And one of the key tools that I try to get teams to do in that process of normalizing conflict is having regular team meetings and creating space to talk about both what's working well in the team and what's not working so well, so that they know that they have that meeting every Sunday, and they know that that's going to be an opportunity, where they can talk about some of the problems that are popping up, and they can have that open face-to-face conversation to try and address some of them and recalibrate and move on to that path that they've all committed to being on.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to have kind of like a step-by-step process. In fact, I was looking through your website a little bit, and on your homepage, you had a three-pronged approach when it comes to conflict, and it was like anticipate, address, and prevent, right? And that, even just that sounds simple, but it makes sense in my mind, right? Like number one, the first and most crucial step is anticipating it, knowing it's coming. And I know we've touched on that before, but I want to dive into that part just a little bit deeper, because, we've got to know that it's coming right before we can actually address it. All right. And if you're ready for it, that'll help the actual process of prevention. So let's talk about that anticipation time just a little bit more, right? Because one of the areas that you focus on is addressing it before it actually gets worse and compounds. And sometimes this can be tricky because there's a difference between, let's just say a simple difference of opinion and an actual conflict itself, right? I think it's important for our listeners to be able to differentiate those two things. So can you do that for us? Can you explain to us what the difference is between a conflict and a difference of opinion? And then if we're able to differentiate that and we do say, okay, this is a conflict that we're seeing, why is it so important that we've got to take that and address it?
It's a great question. And I think that's sort of the crux of sometimes why conflict escalates, is because people, even if they see disagreements happening, they are just sort of uncomfortable with managing conflict. And so they sort of turn a blind eye. They ignore the eye rolls that are happening, or if there's, some tone or there's emails happening behind the scenes, they ignore it because they just hope it's going to go away. So the difference between disagreement and conflict is that a disagreement is just like a basic difference of opinion or a contrast in opinions. So it's when two people maybe have a different viewpoint on, on a team. Maybe it's about nutrition. Like maybe it's about, well, where is the team when we're traveling, having their meals? And maybe there's 2 coaches and they have a disagreement about, we're eating out at McDonald's too much versus we're going and getting, more nutritious meals. And they don't have a lot of emotional energy invested in that. However, conflict is when a disagreement has emotion attached. So maybe one of those coaches feels like their decision-making about where the team's eating isn't being respected, or it's being undermined by the other coach. And once there's emotion involved in a conflict, it takes active work to resolve. So that's when just turning a blind eye and really hoping that it's just going to go away doesn't work. You have to address conflict head on for it to go away. It's not something that will just fade over time. So by anticipating when it's going to come up and recognizing it, that creates opportunities to talk about it at the early stages. And that can prevent some of those long drawn out conflicts where I like to just kind of look at, think about a mountain of baggage that just keeps getting piled on and piled on and piled on through the season. If you can just nip it in the bud right at the beginning, that can help a lot.
Yeah, I'm sitting here thinking of this example because, I think oftentimes those two things, they really are different, right? But sometimes they get kind of convoluted on is this a actual conflict or not? I'm almost laughing in my head when you're talking about where should we go eat, because this kind of conversation applies, I think, just to something like a marriage or a partnership, right? My wife and I deciding, I want Italian, you want Chinese. Well, that's a different of opinion, right? But if one of us is actually mad, the other person's never actually choosing, and it's then that's actually conflict. But sometimes, we think it's maybe not as complex as it actually is, and then we don't approach it, and then it just gets worse and builds up from there. So I think that's what's kind of cool about this conversation is, it's not just about this athletic, team situations. It really does apply to any level of teamwork, whether it's just in your house or workplace or wherever it might be. And I think that's really important to know and important to be able to recognize those two things. And I think that's what takes us right into the next step in your process of addressing that conflict. And what correlates directly with that is, how do we address it, which really boils to the last topic I wanted to dive into under teamwork, and that's communication, right? This conversation is leading directly into that because, all right, it's time to address this. How do we actually communicate it, right? So let's say, for example, we've identified the conflict. We know it's there. It's time to address it. Having that conversation itself can sometimes be difficult, probably for some people more than others. But, you have a strategy, again, on your website that I think is really helpful to help guide people through this. And you've called it observation, feeling, need, and request, right? So that's kind of the 4-step process that you've put out there to have that conversation. Can you walk us through that and really tell us what that looks like so we can take that and implement it ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Because conflict is, people don't enjoy addressing it. It's very uncomfortable for everybody. And so having basically a script that you just described can help a lot. So the script is based on a theory called nonviolent communication, and it was developed by Marshall Rosenberg. And because we sometimes avoid talking about problems, it becomes more and more uncomfortable as time passes. But if we're brave enough to start, the other thing that can happen is that sometimes we can say something that will shut down the conversation and come across as blaming, and then the other person doesn't want to engage. So these are some of the problems that happen when we do try to have those face-to-face conversations in managing conflict. So what this strategy does and the script does is it gives us a chance to become more confident when we're going into those difficult conversations, because we can think through ahead of time what we want to say, what words we want to use, and we have that chance to practice. So we know as athletes, practice is everything, and conflict management and having tricky conversations also takes practice. And it also gives us a chance to problem solve with the other person. So it's really opening up a bigger conversation. When we're thinking about those 4 steps, I'm just going to give you an example. So I was working with the president of a sports association the other day, and she was talking to me about a parent who hadn't completed the club's volunteer hours. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but oftentimes sports clubs will require a certain number of volunteer hours from every family so that they can function, right? So if they're at swim meets or if they're at track meets or whatever, there's different aspects of that where they need volunteers. So this president had a family who just weren't putting in the volunteer hours, and she was getting frustrated. And so she was sending her emails saying, if you don't put in the volunteer hours, we're going to fine you $200, and these sort of threatening emails. And so what I suggested is that she use this conversation strategy to have to start a difficult conversation, and it would give her a chance to better understand what was going on for this family. So she started by acknowledging the family. So she started by thanking them for meeting with her. She said, "Thank you for meeting with me." Then she did her observation. So she said, "I noticed that your family haven't completed the 25 volunteer hours that we require. I've sent you several reminder emails, and now we're kind of close to the end of the season." So she was using really factual information in her observation. Then she talked about her feelings. So she said, "As the president, I feel worried that if all the families don't complete the minimum hours, we won't have equity with the division of work between the families." So she talked about her feelings. So she didn't say, "I feel that you never step up," or "I feel that you never, do what you're being asked to do." So she really focused in on how this was impacting her. Then she went to her need. "I need to understand what's happening for your family." And then her request: "Would you be willing to chat about how we can come up with a solution?" So it's really just a conversation opener, and it gave her that chance to think through how she was going to go into that tricky conversation rather than turning to email.
Yeah, I think it gives us a guideline to just a much more respectful conversation at the end of the day, and one that allows for growth on both sides of it rather than anger. Because I think that's, again, people hear that word conflict and their minds might automatically go towards anger, and it's got to be a conversation that's going to be mad or going to hurt someone's feeling. And that's not always the case. It's just, again, it could be something we just got to find a way to work work with it, right? Within it. And having this guideline will help me understand the differences between us and how we can work through that and nip the conflict before it continues to grow. So I think that's why I found that script and thought it was really fascinating. And it's another thing, I'll put a link in the show notes to that article. Just someone may want to have that on hand. Just next time they have a difficult conversation in front of them, it can help them guide through that. Because I think, at the end of the day, confrontation, having these conversations is not something that's easy. For some people, maybe it's easier than others. Or if you like confrontation, maybe that's a whole different problem that we would have to discuss, right? But it's not something that people like to do, which is human nature, right? But I do think it's one of the reasons why having these conversations can be so difficult, because that initial point of conversation can sometimes be scary to do, right? And so that's really what I want to take and kind of dive into next, is reasons why this kind of communication and these kind of difficult conversations seem to be getting harder and harder to have, right? There's a few things that I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed even more than I have, that are making these kind of conversations a bit more difficult than they have been before. And the first one that I'm going to throw out is this thing called technology, right? Now, look, I'll be the first to tell you that technology is a beautiful thing sometimes, but it's also a horrible thing. It's wonderful because you and I get to talk right now and everybody gets to listen because of technology. It's also horrible because sometimes it's making us really struggle when it comes to the time to actually have a face-to-face conversation and communication, right? So are you seeing that as well? Are you seeing that technology is really hurting us being able to have the face-to-face conversation? If so, how do we not only address this, but maybe improve our in-person communication, even in spite of the technology that's out there?
Brian, I completely agree with you. I think certainly since COVID, it's been a problem. It's been a big problem, but it was something that I was seeing long before COVID. People rely on email to try and to manage conflict, navigate tricky conversations, and it just doesn't work. Like you will never resolve a conflict through an email exchange, because what happens with email or text or instant messaging, whatever you're using, you're sending a one-sided piece of verbal communication. You don't see body language. The other person can't hear tone. All of those nonverbal communicators that are key to our communication aren't there. And I will see, it doesn't matter who I'm working with. I will see the overuse of technology in being used to manage communication just stall things, and people get so caught up in emailing. Like they'll spend hours and hours trying to compose the perfect email that's going to fix everything, and it just never happens. So I think if you can be brave, fully recognizing people are anxious right now, and this is one more thing that it's tough. It's tough having those face-to-face communications, especially when we haven't really been around other people for over a year. But if people can be brave and can reconnect at that personal level, they're going to have a lot more success when problems come up.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that I've seen, just doing these presentations over the course of the past decade that we do, that technology, it's just, it is, we've become reliant on it. Right. And I'm thinking back in my own life, right? Like, I don't think I've ever successfully resolved anything by sending someone a text, right? I mean, sometimes it can be a spark to having a conversation, but you still got to have that conversation face to face at the end of the day. So, I don't think it's what, I don't want to just dismiss technology and, hey, never use it. It doesn't have, obviously it's a tool that can be used, but I just think that you got to be able to look someone in the eye, because otherwise you have no context, right? And you can't really listen. It's just you're giving your side only, and then it could be read a completely wrong way than how you meant for it to be read, right? So there's got to be some back and forth there. So I just know I see it more and more that we rely on that stuff, and sometimes we rely on it when we shouldn't. And I'm sure that's something that you help people navigate through as well. And one of the reasons why these conversations can be difficult. And I think there's a couple other reasons. One of them you actually just touched on, and the key word that you pulled out was anxiety, right? So I know that levels of anxiety and stress are extremely high right now. And a lot of that has to do with, COVID and the situations that all put us in, but it's even more than that. It's just, anxiety as a whole, I feel like is at a level that's higher than it has been before. Right. And so I would imagine that you're also seeing cases of where that anxiety is making people avoid these communications, avoid these kind of conversations, because if I don't do it right, then I won't have to worry about the repercussions of it, right? So is that what you're seeing, right? Is anxiety causing an avoidance? And if it is, even if I am feeling anxious about that conversation, how do I mitigate that?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm totally seeing that, Brian. Like I think, I don't know anyone who isn't sort of feeling really anxious these days. And so if already you're not that comfortable with managing conflict, you don't have some of the tools and strategies to support you in doing that, you don't feel safe, you don't feel comfortable, having that on top of the anxiety you may be feeling about a bunch of other things can be tough and can lead us to just avoiding those tough conversations. But the thing that I do know about anxiety and about conflict is that unmanaged conflict and unresolved conflict or problems causes more anxiety. So it's a bit of a vicious circle. Like, it keeps people up at night. I know personally, if I'm upset about something, or if there's some sort of interpersonal conflict going on in my own life, or if I'm worried about a team I'm working with, I that makes me anxious. And as soon as I, work to resolve it, I feel better. So it's a little, I don't know what the word for that is, if it's ironic or what the correct term is. But one of the things I do is I some of the training that I do is on stress management, and I include managing conflict in that training because it's a way to manage your stress. Get rid of the conflict in your life. You'll feel a lot better. The other concrete strategy that I use is I talk a lot about just breathing. Like, take that time to be mindful, take some deep breaths before you have to try and navigate the conflict.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I'm thinking about as you're talking is that things like stress and anxiety are going to exist. They're always going to be there. I almost view it the same as conflict. We're talking about conflict as, we can't look at it like something that isn't out there. It's going to exist, right? Stress and anxiety are going to exist, and I don't think we want to dismiss that, or say that it doesn't play a role in all this. But I think what you're saying is, we can't allow that to be the excuse, because anxiety might cause us to avoid that communication initially, and in the moment that's easier. But as you said, it's not long term, because it actually just makes it grow, right? It's kind of like, it's probably a horrible example, but I'm like me, like when I got to work out for the day, right? It's easy for me to, in that moment, to say, no, I'm good, right? But if I do it and I'm done, I feel better. Right. I didn't necessarily want to, because in the moment beforehand, it was like, I can avoid that. It's just not, I'm not feeling it right now, or it's going to cause this or that. But in the end goal, you'll actually probably relieve the thing that prevented it in the first place. So yeah, I think it's one of those things that it's not about, okay, how do I eliminate the anxiety? That's not the end goal. It's how do I work through that, and then ultimately, hopefully, resolve some of that anxiety because of the communication, and going back to that script that you provided before, and using those tools to have that communication, but do it in a successful way. I think it all ties together at the end of the day. But I think it's an important thing to discuss, because it's one of the other reasons I see these conversations not happen. And then there's one other that I really want to touch on and kind of wrap this up with, that I know that you're seeing as well. And that's really the impact that a lot of the spotlighted social issues have right now. I think one of the good things that we're seeing a lot recently is we're seeing an increased social awareness of things, inequities, privilege, discrimination, a lot of issues that have been there for a long time that I'm seeing a lot more discussion on, which is a great thing. But I'm also wondering, is there a flip side to this when it comes to having difficult conversations? Are there people out there that might be hesitant to jump in to those conversations and jump into that dialogue because they're worried they might say the wrong thing? Right? Do you think that's the case, or you think we're avoiding some communication and conversations because, and I know that ties into the anxiety, but because we think, well, it's easier for me not to talk about this, because if I do, I might say the wrong thing, and then I've messed it all up, right? Is that going on? And if it is, how do we navigate that? Because I do think at the end of the day, these conversations are important to be having.
Oh yeah, I'm seeing it. I mean, my goodness, I see it every single day in my own personal life, and I think that absolutely, I agree with you. It's fantastic that these conversations are starting to happen. I think that they're tricky, and I think that it's complicated and it's complex. We're talking about having tough conversations with our own families, with our friends. We're concerned about saying the wrong thing. Oftentimes people will say things in my world that I view as being racist, or people not recognizing their own privilege, and I feel that it pushes up against my own personal values. And then when I don't say something, I don't feel good about it. I feel icky. That really opens up that need to have those difficult conversations and maybe prepare for what we can say, so that the other person doesn't shut down, and we're not worried about that, about having them, shut down. So I think that, with everything that's happening with addressing privilege, as I said, we're looking at reconciliation within the Indigenous peoples in Canada and the States, with people of color, people of different gender identities. Like, there's all kinds of social awareness that's growing, and those difficult conversations are starting to happen. But I, at the same time, think that there could be more conversations happening if people felt more comfortable having them, and going back to that script and sort of preparing ourselves for when we're meeting up with a friend who sometimes will say things that it doesn't lie well with us, or if we're at a family dinner and we have an uncle who has different political beliefs than us. Well, what are we going to say the next time that we're speaking with them, so that we're being true to our own values, and it's going to land well with them. So just having that recognition and doing that prep work ahead of time, I think can help. And then finally, I just think that one of the things that I think that's been really cool over the last, certainly the last year, has been the leadership that we've seen in our sports communities take with leading us in being able to address some of this and have those difficult conversations and really normalizing it. So what they're doing is normalizing conflict by talking about, the Black Lives Matter movement in the WNBA, and, most recently with the NCAA, talking about the inequities that female athletes face. And so having that normalized supports all of us in addressing it when we see it.
I think it's so crucial. In fact, I'm going to be doing another episode in this series with a few female TrueSport, advocate athletes, and we're going to be talking about that exact thing, inequities in female sport, and having that conversation. And I plan on doing a lot of listening. I wanted to host that episode because, like you said, I wanted to have those conversations. It would have been easy for me to just say, oh, well, no, let's have a female host that, or someone that has gone, backgrounds, have to look beyond that, right? We have to start having those difficult conversations. What I found from my own experience, just over the past year or two, when these kind of dialogues were happening more and more, is, once I got over that fear, the people that you're talking to that maybe have different backgrounds than you and different experiences than you, they don't focus on maybe the one thing you didn't say wrong. A lot of times I learned that I'm saying things wrong that I didn't even realize that I was, and we actually end up growing because of that. But I think it's just something that it's out there, right? These conversations are happening, and I think it's really positive. Like you said, I think we need to be doing it more, but I think it all ties together, right? Because people are worried about saying the wrong thing, which leads to anxiety, which maybe leads to them using technology to communicate. All of these things tie back together, and all of these things are reasons that I wanted to kind of focus on that communication, because it ties directly into teamwork and leadership, and how do we manage conflict. It all goes together. They're all very unique terms, but I think they tie together and really help us, reach our goals the right way and reach them together and unify whatever team setting you're working in. And I think that's why this is really fascinating conversation to have. And I know a lot of people are going to learn a lot of things from this. And I'll leave the last question to you, just in case there was a thing or two we didn't touch on. I know we could have talked a long time about this, but is there any other final advice or tips that you have to our listeners on how they can better work within the teams that they have in their lives and achieve their goals together? Anything that we didn't get to touch on?
Brian, I think, just wrapping all this up, it was such a great conversation, but I think that for me, the key to all of this, and you just really nicely summarized it when you talked about opening yourself up and just getting, being open to learning from other people and having that self-awareness that you're willing to grow and to learn. And what the basis of that is relationships. So getting to know each other, being open to learning about the other person. And I really think relationship is the key to all team building. It's the key to all conflict management. And it's, if you can invest the time and energy into relationships, face-to-face communication, all of that supports relationship building, then you're going to be well on your way.
Yeah, I think that's where we bring this whole thing full circle, right? We started our conversation getting to know each other a little bit, and then we wrap up talking about the importance of that and how it ties into the entire discussion that we had. And I think that's a really valuable lesson to walk away from this from. And actually, before you go, I want to build our relationship just a little bit further. I don't know if you've listened to our podcast at all, but at the end of these things, we always like to ask a couple of curveball questions, just a couple of things I didn't send you, but just fun things to get to know our guests a little bit more. So you and I can build our relationship little things. So I got a couple of questions I want to throw at you before I let you go. Is that all right?
Sure.
Okay, let's take the constructs that we're talking about, right? Teamwork, leadership, and let's apply that to a couple of fun questions for you. All right. So we're talking all about teamwork. All right. Let's put this in your shoes. Let's say you get to suit up and play for any team in the history of sports, even if it's just for one game, right? But you get to play on that squad. Who are you signing up to play with? Any team come to mind?
Oh yeah, Seattle Storm.
Okay, there you go.
WNBA, Sue Bird is going to be my point guard.
Okay, all right. The GOAT, as her new commercial says. She's a good one. I was expecting Raptors, but I like that better. That answer even better. The Storm. Okay, we're putting.
I think my daughter would kill me if I said the Raptors, even though secretly maybe the Raptors, but Seattle Storm.
Okay, good answer. I'll see if I can put a call in and get you on the team for a day. I'll see what I can do.
Thank you.
And then the second scenario I'll throw at you, focusing a little bit more on the leadership side, but we've talked about leaderships and what effective leadership looks like. And I know you have so many great examples of that in your head of leadership that you look up to. But if there was one leader that you got to spend the day with, who would it be? It could be living or alive, but is there someone out there that you just really idolize because of the leadership they have that you'd love to hang out with for a little while?
Oh, I think it's a tie. And I don't want to sound too cliche, but I can't think of anyone better. Michelle Obama and Brené Brown.
Perfect.
Brené Brown just has my social work values, and Michelle Obama, I can't even say enough about how much she's inspired me.
Yeah, those are great answers. I also was maybe expecting a Drake name to get dropped, so I'm glad we didn't do that. But those are great examples, and just a fun way for us to get to know each other just a little bit more. And I appreciate you letting me throw those at you real quick. But all in all, this was a great conversation. I know our listeners will learn a lot, but I've learned so much because everyone that's listening to this are in team settings, even outside of athletics. And I know that there are things that they can apply to this. And I will also make sure to put Now What's website on the page. I'll put the TrueSport website. You can look through Nadia's information, all the other TrueSport experts. It's a really great series that we're hosting all of you. We appreciate you spending some time with us. I enjoyed getting to know you. Thanks so much for the time. And I hope our paths get to cross again down the road.
Thank you, Brian. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, that's it for today's show. Thanks for listening to the All Me podcast from the Taylor Hooten Foundation, a nonprofit organization leading a national campaign to enlighten people to the truths about appearance and performance-enhancing substances and inspiring people to live and compete without the use of these substances. Please be sure to subscribe to our podcast and tune in to our next episode.